The courtroom was never supposed to be a place for desire, let alone a place where love could stir like a secret flame. Its wooden walls, lined with shelves of dusty law books, had seen centuries of human conflict and judgment. Yet on that particular morning, when sunlight streamed through tall windows and caught the particles of dust in golden beams, something shifted in the air. Amelia Hart, a defense attorney known for her meticulous preparation and icy composure, adjusted her files on the polished oak table. She was never one for distractions. She had built her reputation in the city on an ability to outthink prosecutors, dismantle arguments with surgical precision, and never once allow emotion to cloud her tone. But as the heavy doors creaked open and the sound of leather shoes echoed against marble, her practiced calm faltered. Julian Reeves entered the room with the ease of a man who knew every eye was upon him. As lead prosecutor, he carried an aura that mixed confidence with a quiet intensity. He had dark hair combed neatly, a clean-shaven jawline, and a gaze that could pin witnesses with unrelenting precision. Today, however, when his eyes landed on Amelia across the room, there was a flicker of something unspoken, a softness that contradicted the sharp suit he wore. They had faced each other in trials before, adversaries across the battlefield of the law. Each time had ended in polite professionalism, a handshake, a faint nod. But underneath those exchanges ran currents they had both chosen to ignore. Their lives revolved around facts, evidence, cross-examinations, not feelings. Yet desire had a way of ignoring rules. The trial began. A man accused of embezzlement sat nervously between Amelia and her client. The jury leaned forward, the judge adjusted his glasses, and arguments unfolded like rehearsed plays. Julian's voice filled the chamber, resonant and firm, explaining how numbers told stories of deceit. Amelia countered with her own, her words weaving through the gaps in his logic, reminding the jury of reasonable doubt. To anyone watching, they were opponents at the height of their craft, but to each other, every glance was a spark. When Julian leaned over the evidence table to display documents, Amelia's eyes involuntarily traced the strong line of his shoulders. When Amelia rose, papers in hand, and fixed him with her penetrating stare, Julian felt his heartbeat thrum louder than the gavel's echo. They danced around one another, not just with arguments but with an unspoken intimacy that neither could acknowledge. The hours wore on, and the case grew complicated. Witnesses were examined, objections raised, evidence scrutinized. But somewhere between legal jargon and courtroom tension, a different story unfolded silently. A brush of hands when both reached for the same file. A fleeting smile when their eyes met unexpectedly. A pause in Julian's questioning when Amelia tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, unaware of the effect it had on him. By late afternoon, the proceedings adjourned for the day. The courtroom emptied, footsteps echoing down long corridors. Amelia lingered, gathering her notes slowly, her mind battling with thoughts she had no right to entertain. Julian remained as well, pretending to review documents but really waiting. "Long day," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence. She looked up, startled by how close he had come. "It always is," she replied, her tone guarded, though her chest tightened with something far from caution. Their eyes held for a moment too long. Amelia cleared her throat and stacked her files briskly, but Julian's gaze didn't waver. "You were brilliant today," he admitted softly, as if confessing something forbidden. "You always are." Compliments from him were rare in open court. His job was to dismantle her, not praise her. Yet here, in the hushed emptiness, his words felt intimate, almost dangerous. Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she quickly looked away. "You'll make the jury believe anything you want," she countered, trying to deflect. He chuckled quietly. "That's what I tell myself about you." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was charged, fragile, like a violin string pulled taut. Neither spoke of what hummed beneath their words, but it was there, undeniable. Over the next week, the trial continued. Each day they clashed, their voices sharp in front of the judge, their arguments fierce. Yet in stolen moments, the brief recesses, the minutes before court convened, the silent walks to their cars, something deepened. They found excuses to linger near one another, to exchange a line of conversation that had nothing to do with the case. It was small things at first, a comment about the weather, a question about coffee preference, a shared smile at an overheard remark. But each exchange stitched an invisible thread between them, drawing them closer in ways neither could resist. On the fourth evening, Amelia stayed late, reviewing closing arguments in the library adjoining the courtroom. She traced the lines of her notes but found her concentration broken by a restless energy. When the door creaked open, she didn't have to look up to know who it was. Julian leaned against the doorway, his tie loosened, his usually perfect composure softened by exhaustion. Yet when his eyes met hers, the fatigue gave way to something far more potent. "You work too hard," he said, stepping inside. Amelia smiled faintly. "Says the man still in the building at this hour." He moved closer, the scent of his cologne mingling with the scent of old books. "Maybe I had a reason to stay." Her breath caught. She wanted to respond, to retreat behind wit and formality, but the weight of his presence silenced her. He was close enough now that she could see the faint stubble shadowing his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the vulnerability hidden beneath the armor of his profession. "Julian," she whispered, his name tasting foreign and forbidden on her lips. "Amelia," he replied, his voice low, as though her name itself was a secret he'd carried for too long. The silence stretched, filled only by the beating of two hearts too loud in the stillness. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The trial, the jury, the clients, the expectations. There was only them, two souls standing on the edge of something neither could deny. His hand hovered near hers on the desk, hesitant, trembling with restraint. When his fingers finally brushed against hers, it was as if the courtroom itself sighed. The touch was barely there, yet it sent shivers racing through her veins. She didn't pull away. "I shouldn't," he said, though his voice betrayed his lack of conviction. "Neither should I," she breathed. And then there was no more hesitation. His lips found hers, tentative at first, then deeper, hungrier, as though years of silence had erupted in that single moment. Amelia felt the wall she had built, the armor of professionalism and discipline, melt away under the heat of his kiss. She clung to him, her fingers curling into his jacket, his arms wrapping around her as if to shield her from everything else. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads rested together, their breaths ragged. "We're enemies in there," she whispered, nodding toward the courtroom. "Only in there," he answered, his thumb brushing lightly against her cheek. "Out here. I don't want to pretend anymore." The days that followed became a balancing act between duty and desire. In court, they remained adversaries, their arguments sharp as blades, their expressions controlled. But outside those walls, in quiet corners, in shadowed hallways, in late-night whispers, they allowed themselves to be vulnerable. They spoke of childhood dreams, of battles fought alone, of loneliness disguised as ambition. They laughed softly, stole kisses like criminals hiding evidence, and discovered a tenderness neither had expected to find in such a place. The trial reached its conclusion at last. Closing statements were delivered with passion, the jury deliberated, and the verdict was handed down. Amelia's client was acquitted, and though Julian bore the loss with dignity, his eyes sought hers across the courtroom, not with bitterness, but with a quiet pride. When the gavel struck for the final time, signaling the end, a different kind of silence filled the room. It was the silence of possibility. Later that evening, beneath the glow of street lamps outside the courthouse, they stood together, no longer bound by the rigid walls inside. "So," Amelia said softly, her voice trembling with both relief and uncertainty, "what happens now?" Julian smiled, a rare softness curving his lips. "Now," he said, reaching for her hand, "we stop pretending we're only adversaries. We give this, us, a chance." Amelia searched his eyes, finding not just desire but something deeper, something she hadn't dared to hope for. She nodded, her heart racing with both fear and joy. And as he leaned in once more, the city fading into a blur around them, she realized that love, like justice, often appeared where least expected. In the most solemn of places, in the most unlikely of hearts, it had bloomed, a silent desire, no longer hidden, no longer denied.